everyone. Thank you for finding the time to join us for this session. I'm going to be talking about attacks against supply chains, and this is not a new issue, but nevertheless, this is something that always comes up, and this is something that causes much pain. And the reason for that is quite simple. There are lots of vendors, and many vendors do various internet researchers, and they use this particular combination. It's not a supply chain attack because we have more international vendors rather than Russian vendors, but they use supply chain attacks because this is a method for gaining initial access, and it's not the most typical method for the contemporary attackers, especially those operating in the wild. And every time it's still interesting, and since I'm a cyber intelligence expert, I have to read through lots of reports, and as soon as I see something connected with supply chain, it provokes my interest, and I start reading that. Then when you read the report in detail, it turns out it's not about supply chain, because supply chain is a term they use for calling almost anything from trusted relationships until type squatting, anything but the real supply chain. And the reason for that, again, is quite simple, because it's difficult to implement attack, but it's not really the case. And this is something that I will demonstrate using a case study, a live case study, and I hope I'll be able to prove it to you. Right, so I'll give you the definition of a supply chain attack so that you have a better understanding, so that unlike other vendors, I'm not going to name them, you will not mix and confuse a supply chain and non-supply chain. I will offer you a quiz, though we're not in a game zone, but it will help you to differentiate supply chain attacks and non-supply chain attacks. And then I will give you a case study of a real supply chain attack, which was not sponsored by a state hacker group, but rather bad actors who were financially motivated. And I'll try to prove to you that it's not necessary to hack a large company or a large developer that develops software for a large company to actually carry out a supply chain attack. Because if we're talking about a large network, and a large network operates different types of software, therefore there will be simple software pieces that can be populated through official sites, but there's just one developer behind this software suite, and there is no security inherent in that, and attackers can use it. So my name is Oleg Skulkin. I'm head of the cyber threat intelligence at BI.ZONE. And my team specializes in analyzing various threats. If you are a reader of our blog, you probably saw lots of wolves and other threats. This is what we specialize in. Prior to joining BI.ZONE, I used to be head of the global DFR team at Group IB, which is no longer based in Russia. It was a great team, and I believe it's one of the strongest ones, both in Russia and abroad. They competed with Mendin, and I guess you all heard about them. I author some of the books. Some of them have already been translated into Russian, and the ransomware book is something that is my favorite. But like I said, some of them have already been translated from English into Russian. And I used to co-author reports on multiple threats, but currently we analyze and research local threats which are relevant for Russia and the CIS member states. So if you're interested in learning more about local threats, if your organization is based in Russia, and if you want to understand who, how, and when is going to attack you, well, you're my customer. Let's move on to the most interesting part of my presentation, I would say. So, Something that irritates me all the time is that people usually don't understand what we exactly mean by supply chain attacks. And the MITRE matrix uses the supply chain compromise technique. Well, it's a method used by bad actors to get initial access to a target system initially, and then to use post-exploitation if we're talking about a network. So it's not a fairy tale, it's not something I imagined. Attacks like that are being executed, but oftentimes they're called supply chain attacks while they're not. Anyway, let's go back to the MITRE attack. It's not just one of the methods. There are three sub techniques, if you will. The first one is as follows. Attackers or bad actors or red hats can compromise some software dependencies, and this is exactly what happens oftentimes. Let's say you develop a software, there are dependencies, and the software suites can be developed by different people. Some of them realize that they have to ensure some kind of security of their codes and code lines. Some people are negligent and they tend to ignore that. And again, legitimate data are oftentimes hacked by attackers to get initial access, and they can use the data, legitimate data, to get access to some data repository. They could use stealers, or they can use e-use passwords, and so on and so forth. There are multiple ways for bad actors to get access to some data repository by using legitimate software, then introduce some changes and amendments, and ultimately that would compromise the supply chain. It's not that difficult to realize. The same holds true for development tools. Bad actors can distribute them through various phishing sites. For instance, a software developer is looking for development tools, and attackers can use SEO poisoning, and the developer would download not the original development toolkit, but a copy with that has already been compromised, and this malware will be used later on. So the development toolkit is already compromised, and hackers who have access to that might upload the stealer and get access to data repositories and other resources used by the developer. Ultimately, they can introduce changes into the code, and that'll help them to upscale their attack on the customers of who use the software developed by the developer. There are examples in the wild. I'm talking about software dependencies. I'm not saying that such techniques are used to carry out complicated attacks, but nevertheless, it's one of the options that are used by the bad actors. Lazarus is a good example of a red team that used these software dependencies techniques to get initial access. The next one is probably the most typical technique. This is compromising the software supply chain. And this is something that we have heard of repeatedly. SolarWinds, for instance, there is a software suite, and attackers get access to the website that distributes the software or to the repository. They introduce changes into the updates. For instance, these updates are received by users, they are launched, and the payload has already been compromised. It uses malware, or bad actors can upload something else to the onto the compromised machine and use some other tools that. For instance, if they're interested in a specific organization in a specific country, they can download the payload remotely to these machines so as not to create any panic. Because if you attack a supply chain and this software has lots of users, then it will make the headlines of all the vendors first and all the mass media later. Therefore, the resources you spent on implementing the attack would be spent in vain. And the last one is the compromise of the hardware supply chain. Actually, I cannot give you an example off the top of my head as far as the last bullet is concerned. I mean, no examples, no references in the wild, but lots of hardware pieces manufactured in different countries, and now this is especially relevant because of the geopolitics and the fact that we split countries into friendly and non-friendly countries. So some developers can leave backdoors or add additional functions that, if necessary, would allow them to either extract data, for instance, from mobile devices when law enforcement agencies need to get such data, or they can use separate server hardware pieces as backdoors to get access to servers. So all these things can be implemented, but I'm not saying that it's a popular technique. So the second bullet is the most popular. The first one is gaining steam, while the third bullet shown in the slide is not that popular. But we'll leave it and see what happens. So, as promised, let's play a game, and you will have to vote from time to time. I don't think, I hope it's not gonna get stuffier than it's now here. Anyway, you will have to guess whether it's a supply chain attack or not. Case 1, there is a group named Liquid, and they have a very interesting channel which is called NMB. So they compromised about 50 Russian companies from different industries, and they publish some of the data in their Telegram channel. And a supply chain compromise is a technique that allows bad actors to get initial access to a system or a server, whatever. In case of the Liquid group, they compromised IT service providers, and they used the IT service providers to get access to their clients' networks. So, my question to you is as follows. Do you think an attack like that is a supply chain compromise? Please raise your hand if you believe that it is. Raise your hand if you think it is a supply chain attack. This is it? Right. Let's see what the right answer is. No, it's not, because actually it's a different technique, which is also quite popular. It is called trusted relationships. The ID is T1199. By the way, as far as trusted relationships, this is the most common confusion, because, you know, if we're not talking about software providers, but you get an update to your software suite, you get a malware DLL, or an entire update, or the update contains a compromised code. And your provider, your subcontractor may have access to your network because he maintains it. So when you have trusted relationships between your network and the provider, oftentimes they use legitimate account to hack your network. It's not about software compromise, it's not about hardware compromise, it's not about dependencies compromise. It's an attack via the trusted relationships because of the legitimate data. And attackers hop from the network of your provider to your network, and depending on the rights, they can roll out their attack and use malware and, well, if they just steal your data and don't publish it, whether it's a malicious act or not, that remains to be seen. Anyway, let's move on. There is another example that is called SOC Ghoulish. It's a cool thing, by the way. The way it works is as follows. You have a victim, and this victim is looking for things online, right? So this victim visits a compromised website, a website which redirects the victim to another website. And he or she sees a notification saying, well, your Google Chrome version is not that new, you have to update it because it's no longer secure. And there is a green button saying download. If you press this button, you will download an archive file, and the user then executes the file, and this is it. The machine is compromised. And the question to you is basically the same one. Do you think it's a supply chain compromise? The mechanics are very are just the same. If you believe it is, then raise your hand. I see 2, 3, 4 hands raised, 5, 6, 7 hands raised. This is what I see. This is it, right? Yeah. By the way, this is a random sequence. So the answer is no, it's not a supply chain compromise. It's a different technique which we call drive-by compromise. First and foremost, it was a more complicated attack because we were talking about a browser and an update, but it was not an update, right? And you see either a VBS or other file, and if a user clicks on it, then he or she downloads a NetSec board, which is a remote access tool, and thus the machine is compromised. But since it's about redirection from one website to another website, and a user is redirected to a compromised website, it's a phishing technique of sorts, because the user is told that there is an update that he should download. So it's something in between the drive-by compromise and the user execution. Sometimes you don't need to use initial access techniques to get this initial data, but in this case it's a drive-by compromise. The next case is NJRET, which is it stands for Remote Access Trojan, and what they did in this case is that they distributed a TeamViewer. I guess you're all familiar with this legitimate remote access tool used by lots of sysadmins, and the victim would download the installer, double-click on it, the TeamViewer would be installed. Everything seems to be fine, but in addition to that, they would also install the NJRET. So, is it a supply chain compromise? Please raise your hand if you believe that it is. I see 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, a total of 14 hands raised. Thank you so much. Well, you had enough time to think this over. Right. Anyway, it's not a supply chain compromise. This is the example that I talked to you about before. When you don't have initial access, and this is it's a user execution example. It's not about phishing, therefore you don't see any drive-by compromise here, and the user wants to download the software, he downloads it, he executes the launcher, installs the software, but in addition to installing legitimate software, he also installed the rat Trojan. And the last but not the least example, well, we call it Laser Werewolf. It's a South Korean hacker group. So what they did is as follows. The 3CX company develops the software suites for IP telephony, and they compromised the 3CX network. Then they modified the updates for one of the apps used by the 3X company, which is named 3CX Desktop App, and that allowed the group to get initial access to the hosts of the users. So, the very same question, is it a supply chain compromise? What do you think? Right, I'm not going to count the hands because there are so many hands in the air. But finally, yes, it is a supply chain compromise. If you deep dive into it, it becomes obvious that they got access to the network of the corporation, and they modified the code, and ultimately that allowed them to compromise the machines that downloaded the updates along with their malware. And it's a complicated attack. If you maintenance ran an investigation on that, and so the company used a software developed by a third party, and the third party was compromised initially. Then they used a supply chain attack to compromise the 3CX, and on the after that, the customers of 3CX were compromised. It was awesome, but since lots of hosts were compromised, because many people, especially those based abroad, used their software. But anyway, the malicious component was downloaded by even hosts based in Russia, and lots of them were compromised. And overnight, the websites of all the vendors based abroad started saying that it's a supply chain attack against 3CX. Then it made the headlines in mass media. Unfortunately, nothing good came out of it. It took them a long time to prepare this attack, but it was not as efficient as it might have been. But you have to realize that not every company has a blue team that is tasked with protection, and not all the companies have enough protection tools. So, despite the fact that it made the news, the bad actors still got access to certain hosts and then used it for their purposes. Anyway, let's move on to a real case example of a supply chain compromise, a supply chain attack. As mentioned before, a supply chain compromise is a way to get initial access to a server or a host, and sometimes it doesn't take long to to get access, to get initial access, and the damage might not be as pronounced. However, if we are talking about significant damage, the life cycle attack is not that short. In other words, bad actors will do the supply chain compromise to get initial access, but then it'll take them multiple steps to scale up the attack and solve a number of problems to achieve the goal, which might be stealing data if we're talking about industrial espionage, or getting access to CRM. For instance, Lazarus are interested in cryptocurrencies, and South Korea is quite advanced in terms of using cryptocurrencies. And one of the ways for them to get so advanced was to hack other companies across the world. Financially motivated hackers, are oftentimes a success in implementing these attacks. Anyway, so it's a public case, and I did this on purpose. I decided to share with you a public case so that you can read the detailed report at your leisure later on. And what would happen if bad actors would try to hack your network? Would you be able to identify the attack at different stages? And the largest damage is caused by hackers like that. It's one of the dark side ransomware affiliates. You probably heard about this group. It's no longer active. At least they no longer use this brand. But anyway, their affiliates managed to compromise Colonial Pipeline. You probably heard about that example. So anyway, the case described by Mendiant, you can find details in the report, but we will deep dive into every single stage of the life cycle of the attack. It was a financially motivated group, and they didn't have advanced capabilities, so to speak, but when you hack lots of networks in the same country, in that particular case we're talking about the US, you start realizing quite quickly what tools are used by these companies. And as mentioned, you don't have to hack Microsoft and so on and so forth. All you need to do is hack a website that is used by many companies to download updates for the software suites. In this case, they used the CCTV Security Pros website. It's a vendor who services CCTV systems, closed-circuit TV systems, and lots of large companies use CCTV cameras. Their software has to be updated, and companies would go to a website and download the updates for the software. And that's exactly what they compromised. They Trojanized the smart PSS installer, and companies, bona fide companies, without any suspicions, would download the updates from the website that they used repeatedly in the past. So they installed the updates without a worry in the world. But it turned out that it was not as easy as it might have seemed. It's going to be a kill chain spanning 12 slides, so be patient. The victim, the admin who was responsible for updating the CCTV software, downloaded the file, which the name of the slide is shown right here on the slide. It seemed to be a legitimate file. The extension of the version is different, but it didn't provoke any suspicions from the admin because the file name was basically the same. So he downloaded, he launched the installer, and the software, the update was installed. But The problem was as follows. Well, actually, it's not a problem for the bad actors. It was good for the hackers. Anyway, the file, the legitimate file downloaded by the admin, dropped two files. The first one was the smart PSS, in other words, the legitimate file, and the second one was named smartpss.exe. Again, it's a match. It did not raise any suspicions. You would never think that it was something illegitimate. But the smart PSS was just a renamed mishta, which is quite a popular file that allows you to execute some HTA file from the host or a remote location. So the HTA file was based on a remote server, and that's where it was executed from. Despite the fact that it was modified, so it was not a legitimate mishta.exe, which is usually part of an operating system. They introduced a patch, and that's why hashtag was never matched. But the metadata of the file included everything like Microsoft Corporation, mishta.exe, and so on and so forth. So if your rules allow you to detect system files that are located at a strange location, and especially if they were renamed, at this stage of an attack, you might have been able to detect it, and you might have seen that this seemingly legitimate file was not legitimate because it dropped a file that seemed to be a system file, but in the wrong directory and with the wrong name. You might have pinpointed this anomaly. You might have isolated the host. Much depends on your playbooks that you use. If you don't, you would still have been able to understand that something was wrong with the host. So at the very first stage of the compromise, the bad actors were in the wide open. Were wide open. However, if you don't have monitoring systems, if you don't have the experts, then the kill chain goes on. What happened next is as follows. Actually, it becomes even more interesting. The renamed mishta file was executed, and it executed in its turn. It executed the PowerShell, and sometimes it's difficult to detect it. In the past, if you saw PowerShell with coded arguments, you would immediately suspect a compromise. But if you take a look at a contemporary network, you'll see lots of files like that, and lots of things might be executed via PowerShell. However, if you know what is good and what is bad in a specific network, then you can detect certain anomalies. It would be quite realistic. And in this particular case, PowerShell was executed without BX64 commands, but it launched a backdoor called smoked ham. When the backdoor was downloaded and when it made it to the host, the bad actors could capture screens and keystrokes and so on and so forth. And it was definitely a server that was used to control the CCTV cameras, and I guess some authorization data could have been stolen. And the beauty of the supply chain compromise is that the malicious software could be installed on servers to get additional data. So, like I said, this is only a technique to get initial access. Right, let's move on. This is something that allows you to identify almost anything. Let's say they get access to the server. They can capture keystrokes, and the question is, what's next? They will execute some commands such as net users, system info. Lots of commands were executed. I have provided you with a hyperlink to the report on purpose. Please make sure that you read it. If, by the way, Smoked Ham used the PowerShell to execute these recon commands in a ciphered way. This is something that should have risen their suspicions, because PowerShell starts launching and executing recon commands such as net user, who am I, and so on and so forth. It was a way to detect that. But, of course, if you monitor that, and if you have experts who are skilled in detecting such anomalies, let's move on. How do bad actors move in the network? Everything is quite simple. If they can use RDP, then they will definitely use it, regardless of whether these are financially motivated hackers, such as ransom affiliates, or state-sponsored groups, regardless of where they are based. RDP is a convenient way, and they use it because they want to get access to the remote desktop as soon as possible. And they can modify several parts of the registry, and that's exactly what they did. For instance, if you have a server which cannot be accessed via RDP, and all of a sudden you see that a regexe is used to modify registries and enable RDP access to the server, that should raise your suspicions. And despite the fact that various techniques are used to get this material, most of bad actors still use dumping. And Microsoft is well aware that it's still an option. So by default, Credo is not going to be cached, but there is a register key that can be modified to cache it. And that's exactly what bad actors did, and it should have been a red flag for them at this stage. It should not happen this way. If you see that just key being modified, it should be a red flag showing that something is wrong. In other words, it's another attack cycle showing that regardless of the initial access, it's a compromise in process. However, if you don't monitor it, they can do almost anything they want. Right, moving on. Bad actors like remote access tools, and I told you about TeamViewer, which was not a supply chain compromise example. They used their own NJ-RAT, but they could use AnyDesk, TeamViewer, and bad actors use it all the time because it's already there in the network. So why not use the virusing tools that are used by the admins? And when you investigate a case, you ask them, is this desk yours, remote desktop yours? It might be because we have over 200 servers, so bad actors can disguise their activities as legitimate. And they used Ultra VNC in this particular case, and they did not obfuscate their actions too much. They just called it winvnc.exe, but they dropped it into the update Chrome. It's a weird directory, by the way. And if you have the rules for the remote access, and if one of the rules says that if a remote access tool is not based in the right directory, for instance in this one, you would have been able to detect this illegitimate activity pretty quickly. Moving on, it's another popular thing, ngrok. Everyone wants to avoid the firewall through a tunnel to get a persistent access to the network. So ngrok is used by almost anyone. And if we're talking about a local threat landscape, it's worth mentioning that there are several groups, both financially motivated, who use ransomware in Russia, and state-sponsored groups that do not use ransomware. They all use ngrok. It's simple to detect. So, often you can use domain names at the very least, or you can use the metadata of the file itself to detect ngrok. If no one uses it in your organization, and all of a sudden you see that it has been dropped, then it's 100% a red flag. Right. They used Ultra VNC, then ngrok. What do you think is going to be next? Again, they did not disguise their activities that much, but they wanted to get a persistent access. And there are lots of techniques to achieve persistence in the system. A maker attack gives you a long list. No one uses them. They use a modified run key in the startup folder and services and tasks. 99.9% of incidents that you will investigate, or even I will investigate, will see a modified run key to achieve persistence. Other tools are very rarely seen. So in this particular case, they did just that. They used the Ultra VNC in the run, then they used ngrok, and that's how they achieved persistent access to the network. However, that was not the end of it. The bad actors changed the W-digest, but they thought, what if the sysadmin who downloaded the software update in the first place for the CCTV cameras, what if he typed in something from his keyboard? So they decided to use another tool, which was a key logger, and they dropped it into program data PSH and executed it. And if you take a closer look at the folders, program data is something that everyone drops their files into. Update roaming is totally opposite. Everyone wants to drop libraries, malware, and scripts into the program data folder. It would be difficult to detect in this case, but if you implement threat hunting in your organization, and if you track files in the program dates and their scripts, then it's a keylogger, it's not an encryptor, so you should have been able to detect this pretty quickly as well. But even that was not the end of it. So let's go back to program data once again, and the bad actors believed that ngrok and Ultra VMC was not enough. They decided to use a beacon just in case they wanted to get reverse access to it. So they used Cobalt Strike. They dropped it into the program data /Cisco/update.exe. It looks to be legitimate, but if you know the folder Cisco usually uses, you'll see that it's not the one shown here. And it's another example that a Cobalt Strike stageless payload might be compromised. So if you get lots of data from the public domain on the Cobalt Strike, if you have info like that, and again I'm talking about financially motivated hackers primarily, you would be able to detect that and double check the processes coming from that particular server. You have to make sure that it's a legitimate file in the first place. You might recall that in this long life cycle of the compromise, the bad actors modified the registry so that everything would be cached, and they decided that it was high time to dump the LSS using Task Manager. Some of them download them to host from the GitHub in several attempts, and either they are able to deactivate the antivirus, or if they fail to do that, they would try to download from some mega rather than GitHub, so antivirus will not be able to detect it. In their case, they were more they used a very simple approach. They used Task Manager. If you right-click on the LSS and select Dump, and that's exactly what they did. Moreover, when they dumped it, they saw the authentication data that they needed, and well, again, they initially modified the registry to be able to get RDP access to the compromised host, which means that they like RDP just like anyone else. And following that, they were able to move along the network. According to the Menden report, it ended well, and the compromised life cycle ended when the bad actors got access to the network. Their follow-up activities became too obvious, and that was the end of the attack. However, at this stage, it doesn't take many more chain links to deactivate the antivirus, rollout and install a de-encryption program, and then they would launch their ransom software. Right. As for the main takeaways, even if the bad actors are not that advanced, if it's not a public, if it's not a state-sponsored group, it doesn't mean that they cannot execute a supply chain attack. And the case study that I shared with you was about a financially motivated hacking group. Software could be stored in different places on different servers, and oftentimes it's simple to compromise software. Therefore, financially motivated groups can also execute such attacks. As far as prevention is concerned, it's hardly ever possible to prevent supply chain attacks. And bullet 3, the third takeaway, is as follows. It's impossible to prevent a supply chain attack, or at least it's next to impossible. It's too difficult. If bad actors use this technique to get initial access, it would still take them lots of steps to complete the life cycle of their attack. And you have multiple tools to detect their attack, and you should definitely use them. As far as the ransomware is concerned, in early September we'll publish an updated report devoted to 3 groups, and as the slide says, more wolves are coming. These are the 3 groups that try to attack companies in Russia with the help of ransomware. Please scan this QR code. It's not a supply chain compromise, trust me on that. Don't worry if you don't have a corp. So anyway, you'll get a link to the report as soon as it's published. That brings me to the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Right, we do have questions from the floor. I was just wondering, smoked ham, what kind of file was it? It was a backdoor. It was a backdoor. It was just an executed backdoor file, and the bad actors used it so that they could use PowerShell to capture screens and keyloggers. And they're like kids. They would upload something. They would see that it doesn't work. They would upload something else. They create too much noise, but they don't care about that because if you monitor your network, they get thrown out immediately. But did they dump it from the client end, or did they get admin rights? No, it was a software, they didn't have to escalate the privilege in this particular case. Are you out of questions? Any other questions? Right, we do have another one. Please bring the mic to this gentleman. Was the initial file signed in any way? No, it was illegitimate. It was a legitimate file. Legitimate files were stored at a website. The bad actors first compromised the website. They would get access to all the files. They modified the legitimate files, but since no one double-checked that on the website, but when you download, you can double-check the digital signature to see whether it was the right vendor. Was it digitally signed by the vendor? Right, it was signed. It was digitally signed, but like I said, it's not a large company. If you want to compromise a large company, it takes too long and it's too complicated. But if you run a software program developed by John, one single developer who still works there, and sometimes these files are not even digitally signed. Well, digital signature would be a prevention measure at stage 0. You're right, but for instance, if you use software for CCTV cameras, well, you might double check it, and it might not have digital signature in the first place. But even if it is signed, then not the most advanced expert would probably be responsible for that software. Thank you for your presentation. It was an interesting one. So my question is as follows. You gave us every detail on the protection and detection measures after the supply chain compromise. And you mentioned that it was difficult to detect the vulnerability itself. And I was just wondering if there were any tools that could be used in the sandbox for double-checking the updates. What's your take on that? Well, it's a working pattern, but the question is totally different. How much money would you be willing to spend to analyze every single update, even if you do it in a sandbox, even if it's automated? So it's a big question mark. If you're a large company who can afford it, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying that it's not practically expedient, because given the cost, oftentimes it's irrelevant. However, if your software can be double-checked in a centralized way at a national level, then it's a different case. But the Mendon example that I shared with you is not about that. It's just a software program for one server, and probably no one else knows about this program. However, if you analyze a large company, you'll see that there are lots of software suites like that run by that company, and this is the weakest link, because you're not gonna double check every single update. Shadow IT is another example. So if you control everything in your network, then your super zero trust, and we're talking about realistic scenarios when a real company did not double check an update. Right, got it. So it's not economically expedient. Exactly. And a probability of being attacked by hackers like that, who would use a supply chain compromise, is really low. Well, if you're engaged in some serious activities, the probability might be higher. But if you're just a usual company, it's highly unlikely that you will be compromised with this help of a supply chain attack. Right, got it. Thank you. Hi, I was just wondering what's the benefit for SMEs, small and medium enterprises, to seek protection against such targeted compromises if the probability of being subject to such an attack is low? How much money would they need to spend? Well, you should ask yourself a different question. Things that I talked to you about today, supply chain attacks, is a way to get initial access. And the SMEs, naturally, SMEs are not going to be attacked by hackers to get initial access. However, the post-exploitation or plus-minus usual things that you should be able to protect yourself against, or your business will not have the digital assets that are worth protecting. For instance, you have a business and bad actors get initial access and encrypt everything, and you don't have any backups. Is it going to damage your business? If the answer is no, then you don't need any protection. If the answer is yes, then you need to calculate the cost efficiency and see how expensive for you it would be to seek protection and compare it with the potential damage. Much depends on your business. I cannot give you an answer off the top of my head. It depends on the company. Right, got it. So it's not for everyone. It's not for all SMEs. Right, got it. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and hi everyone. I want to confuse you somewhat. Well, you can try to do that. Let's imagine that, given your scenarios, the file would not have been signed with a legitimate digital signature. Let's say the user downloaded the file and the file is not signed by a subcontractor. The user still executes the file. Is it a different technique in that case? No, hold on a second. And my second question is as follows. So let's say the bad actor managed to provide a digital signature, but the file was downloaded from a non-legitimate website. Let's say they hacked the certification center and they signed it for the company. It's not going to be supply chain compromise. Supply chain is about supply chain, right? So, and you're talking about bypassing protection means because you use legitimate digital signature to sign a malicious file. So the point I'm trying to get across is as follows. Your first example, when a subcontractor was hacked, and you mentioned that it's a different technique, you did not give us details on how they hacked the subcontractor. No, actually I did, because let's say, you have trusted relationships between a network and a machine. No, then I got that point. So this subcontractor get access to your legitimate access to your network, and if he is hacked to get access to your network, it's trusted relationship compromise. It's not about hacking the software. Even the concept is different. You're using legitimate accounts to hop from one no good machine to a different legitimate machine. There is another technique which is called legit account, and but it's no longer about trust relationship because this particular machine is well known. It's a good machine, while the other one is not, and you'll be detected almost simultaneously. Right, I agreed on that, but well, let's step back from ID. In your first example, the trusted relationship could underlie the supply chain compromise, and the logic will still be there. Well, I disagree with that. The concept is totally different. Supply chain is about compromising software or hardware or software dependencies. However, if we are talking about hacking a sysadmin machine to hop to your network, it's not about supply chain because you don't supply anything. It's about just trusted relationship between your admin and your network. But in that particular case, we're talking about service supply chain. It should not be about service. It should be about software or hardware. Right, got it. Thank you. Thank you so much.